Hey, hello. Tonight we are continuing our scary story marathon, this time with a little soft-spoken installment for those of you who like soft-spoken. As always, I got this little guy here on my coast, ready to hang out. And I'm very excited. There are some really good ones in this video. I culled these stories from various sources, unlike my previous videos, which have been culled from the Jezebel story contest, that archive from many years past. So these ones do not have names, is my point. But I like them a lot, and I think you'll like them too. So, without further ado, here is the first story. When I was 23, I was staying overnight for the first time at a girl's place who I had just started dating. We fell asleep, and at some point during the night, I rolled over to throw my arm around her, and she wasn't there. I wasn't overly concerned. I thought she had probably gone to the bathroom or to get a glass of water. Then I got a feeling like I was being watched. I had my back towards the door, and I looked over my shoulder to see her standing in the middle of the room, mostly still, but trembling slightly. I asked her if she was okay. She didn't answer initially. I asked again, and she responded, her voice shaky and tearful. "He's in the living room. He says he's going to kill you." I'm gripped by panic immediately. Her apartment is one bedroom in an older building, and it kind of snakes. I have to walk from the bedroom through the bathroom and through the galley kitchen to the living room. I pull a kitchen knife slowly from the block as I sneak past. I hear her say, "I begged him not to," as I tiptoe towards the living room. I pause briefly and steel myself up for whatever is in that living room, then burst through the doorway. Nothing. Nobody there. I let out a relieved sigh and then go back to the bedroom. She's still standing there, exactly how I left her. I face her, put my hands on her upper arms and say, "Are you asleep?" And she starts convulsing and collapses into a heap on the floor. There would be many more sleepwalking and night terror adventures in the short-lived relationship, but this one really stuck with me. Not exactly a ghost story, but what the hell do you want? It was scary. I'll say. The second story. Years ago, when I was about 11 or 12, my little sister and I would mess with a Ouija board. We got one for Christmas once, but we were asked to burn it by our grandmother, who was certain, on the advice of the 700 Club, that it was an instrument of the devil and not such a good thing for our moral development. But we were not to be prevented, so we took an old piece of plywood and tarted it up with a lipstick alphabet and yes and no and all of that, and then wadded up a piece of aluminum foil to use as a planchette, the little thing you move. We'd sit in the backyard, it was summertime, and call up all sorts of interesting spirits and have conversations with them. During this period of time, I came in from mowing the lawn early one evening, and my mom informed me that I had a phone call, a girl. I was at an age where phone calls from girls were desired, but rare, so I was taken aback. Who had called? Kay, my mom said, her number's on the fridge. This was weird. There were no K's in my junior high circle of friends, in fact, no K's at all that I could think of. But the previous day, my sister and I had Ouija'd up a K, supposedly dead at a young age. This was very weird. So I hustled up to the parents' bedroom, which was a place to make daylight private phone calls, and dialed the number. Kay answered. The connection was fuzzy and full of static, like in a wind tunnel, but the voice was clear. "Do you know who this is?" she said. I said, "I have a pretty good idea." "What did we talk about? I wish I could tell you." It happened pretty fast, and I, in my boy detective ways, would press her about where she was calling from and that kind of thing, but she was glancing, almost flirty. I don't recall her answering any questions directly. I do recall at the end of the conversation, she broke off by saying that someone was coming and she had to go. And there was a change in the timbre, a swelling of the background noise. Then she clicked off and was gone. Now, surely this was fake, a prank played by my sister, but as best as I can tell, no. I established my sister's whereabouts, playing in a different backyard, and I called the number every day for 2 weeks, thinking that if it were a payphone or someone's parents' phone, someone would eventually pick up. No one ever did. At a certain point, I stopped trying. I think school started, or I had a crush, or whatever, and that would have been the end of it, a funny story for one-upping spooky stories. But as the years went by, the 3 times I was near a Ouija board at parties in the dorm, Kay would ring in and ask for me. I was never a part of the Ouija team, I swore it off, but Kay didn't, and she wanted to speak with me, and I never did. It's pretty much only now that I'm curious about what she wanted. Back then, I was creeped out, and I was irritated at being bothered. I don't know what it all means, or if it means anything at all. Alright, then this one is the third. When I first moved into my Emerson College freshman dorm, a massive, crumbling old structure called the Charles Gate in 1993, I had no idea I would be staying in one of Boston's most notoriously haunted places. But during orientation week, the rumors about occult activity were inescapable. Older students told stories about a cloaked apparition who appeared to women at night, about a ghost of a little girl who allegedly died in a fall down the elevator shaft, who could still be heard bouncing her ball in the halls. Built in 1891 as Boston's premier luxury hotel, the Charles Gate fell into disrepair and had a long stint as a welfare hotel before it was converted into dorms, first for Boston University, then for Emerson. Even without the ghost stories, the place was overwhelmingly creepy. Battered by time, rowdy students, and neglect, this labyrinthine former showplace was infested with rats that would scuttle and scrape in the walls at night and chew through any snacks we happened to keep in our rooms. As student stage manager, I would often be sent alone to the ornate ballroom to turn on the lights so the hundreds of cockroaches breeding there in the dark could scuttle out of sight before the more squeamish actors arrived for rehearsals. And in the basements, where the stables for the 19th century guests' horses still stood, was deemed strictly off-limits because of an intricate series of dangerously unstable tunnels that was said to snake away from it into the depths of the city. Thanks to the reputation of the Charles Gate as a haunted place, occult enthusiasts were always trying to get students to sign them in so they could explore. And because my floor, the 3rd floor, was said to be a hotbed of paranormal activity, it was not at all unusual to find goth girls huddled over Ouija boards in the halls at night, sometimes right in front of my door. I thought their spiritual experiments were cool and would often get freaked out watching them commune with the dead. But other than very terrifying nightmares of a dark figure standing beside my bed, I didn't experience anything paranormal until halfway through the semester. It was almost dawn one night in the middle of winter, and I got up to use the bathroom down the hall. When I entered, I heard someone crying hard in one of the stalls. I wanted to be discreet and give the girl her privacy, so I ignored it. But when I left my stall to wash my hands, the weeping got much louder and sounded almost desperate, so I called out, "Are you okay?" At the sound of my voice, the crying stopped abruptly. In the mirror above the sink, I could see the door to the stall where the crying was coming from was ajar. I crossed over and gave it a little knock to see if the girl needed help, and at my touch, the door swung open, revealing that nobody was inside. I was so startled, I screamed, and then I ran back to my room where I woke up my 2 roommates who comforted me while I cried and shook with fright. This is, I believe, the 4th story. After the North Ridge earthquake in '94, my mom told my dad, "Find us somewhere else to live because we're not living in Southern California anymore." He talked to his job and ended up finding a house outside of Atlanta where we lived for 5 years. My sister and I were young, so my dad took care of everything with regards to finding the house and being there for the closing, so my mom had no idea what we were moving into. As we unloaded the moving truck, the drunken neighbor stumbled across the street and said something to the effect of, "Didn't you hear about that lady whose husband died in this house?" My parents brushed it off as the rambling of a drunken neighbor who had just stumbled across the street. While we lived there, nothing spooky really happened beyond my dad saying he woke up one night saying he saw what looked like a little girl sitting on the trunk at the foot of the bed. After we moved to Florida, my mom saw a Dateline episode about Lynn Turner. She killed her husband, a police officer, by slipping antifreeze into his Jell-O, knowing it was mostly undetectable and would look like he just got sick with some freak symptoms. There were some empty antifreeze containers in our basement when we lived there, but we didn't think anything of it. She then started dating a firefighter, and when he died under the same mysterious circumstances, his mom reached out to the mother of her now dead husband, and the investigation started. Dateline drove by and filmed the house for the episode, and when they drove by it, they did it while we lived there. We painted the house after moving in, and our trash cans were at the bottom of the driveway, which made it feel even creepier. There was an episode of that Oxygen show, Snapped, about her as well, and they also used shots of the house either while we lived there or after we had moved out. He died in what would eventually become my bedroom. Anyway, she was convicted for the murder of the police officer, and she killed herself in prison. The fifth story. Back in high school, I shared a bedroom with my younger brother, which was difficult because he was a frequent sleepwalker. The hardwood floors would creak when he would get up and walk out of the room. I'd have to follow him and bring him back to bed at least 2 to 3 times a week. My brother was a hard-headed kid and was usually pretty difficult to scare, so it came as a surprise to me when one day he asked if I had been noticing anything weird in the house. He tells me that when he's home alone, things have been moving in front of him. He'd put down a glass of juice, and if he left the glass for a moment, it would move, and one time he came back and it was empty. He started to get very uncomfortable if anyone left him home alone for more than 10 minutes or so. Came home from school one day and he was already home and looked pretty shaken. He tells me that he started to feel sick, so he went down to the cooler basement, and on the couch he saw an old man sitting there staring at him. He sprinted up the stairs and locked the door. The sleepwalking became more frequent and was almost a nightly thing after that. One night, I hear the creak of the hardwood, the usual sign that he's on the move. So I wake up in time to see him standing there, the streetlight outside the window lit up just enough behind him so I was able to make out his figure staring down at the bed. I remember sitting up and saying, Jimmy, hey, lay back down, man." I kept repeating his name until he looked up at me, turned around, and walked out the door and down the hallway, the floors creaking under him. Frustrated, I turn on the lamp and I'm about to follow him when I look down and see he is laying in his bed, asleep. No one else was awake. No one else saw a thing. Never told him. A year or 2 later, we moved into a new house, and my brother never sleepwalked again. This is the 6th and final story. I work in Chicago, but live in Columbus, Ohio. I commute home every other weekend. I've been doing this for 4 years, so I pretty much have my roots down. I drive because flying is too much money and hassle. From Illinois to Ohio, I take the 8094 to 65 south to 70 east. It's boring, but quick. On the way back, I go a different way. From Columbus, I take 270 to Route 23 north to US 30 west. I take the freeway around Fort Wayne and take the 30 all the way to the 80 turnpike. Last January, I needed to be in the office on Monday. I usually work from home, so I left at like 2 a.m., which would get me to work at 7:30 or 8 a.m. after changing at my apartment. I'm very used to the route and know exactly when the rest stops are and where the gas stations are and the decent coffee. first rest stop I stopped at was on Route 23, about an hour out. I stop here because it's a good 2 hours to the next one. I used the urinal, and written on the top in very neat handwriting, it said, "I want to suck your heart." 1:18, 11:30 p.m., so about 3 hours ago from when I saw it. Above the urinal on the wall was a pretty decent cartoon of a being sucked. Next to it was a depiction of a different kind of sex. Written beside it was, "I want her in my..." I finished up. I noticed there were several trucks parked in the lot, and I kind of wondered if it was one of them and if they'd found their good time. I got in my car and drove off. I have a Subaru Forester with a sticker on the rear window that says, "Ohio State Dad." I stopped for more coffee at a Speedway, didn't have to pee, and got on the US 30 heading west. Just after I-75, I pulled into the next rest area. I walked in and was shocked at what was written on the walls. It was the same cartoonist, but this time the cartoon pictured a vivisection. Very realistic organs were next to a torso, and a kneeling man had his face fully entrenched in the body cavity. I have to admit that this kind of thing scared me, but I had to pee. On top of the urinal was written, "I want to rip you apart and F your guts. I want to eat your filled intestines." 1:19 at 2:45. I looked at my watch. It was just after 4:30. I was gaining on this guy. I couldn't stop thinking about this. I think the fact that the drawings were so professional and the spelling was so good, it creeped me out even more. I drove on. I watched as I passed cars and trucks. I tried to see in the windows, but it was still dark. I was passed only twice, once by a big BMW and once by an older Chevy Impala. Both had Indiana plates. An hour and a half later, I was approaching the next rest stop. I didn't really have to go, but I had to see if there was more graffiti, so I got out. It was the only car in the parking lot. There were a couple of trucks. I walked to the bathroom. I'm not ashamed to admit that I was a little more than afraid, and I had gotten a wrench out of the toolbox I carried with me on these trips. The second I hit the lobby, I could smell crap. I almost turned around, but I had to look. I walked into the men's room. The lights are automatic and they flickered on, in foot-high letters written in crap. I think it was crap anyway. It said, "Almost there, Dad. Ohio. LOL." I almost fainted. The thick smell of crap and the fact that somehow I felt that they were talking to me. "Dad. Ohio State Dad." I stepped back and then noticed that a raccoon or groundhog or something had been ripped apart and its carcass and guts were laying next to the stall. I got the F out of there. Once outside, I felt better, but as I walked to my car, I heard a whispered bark and I swear, some muffled laughter. I looked around, but it was dark and there were bushes and trees all over. I didn't want to run because I knew if I did, I would panic. I fast walked, got in my car, started it, and got on the road. Once my phone had synced up, I called 911 and reported the vandalism at the last rest stop. They took the call like no big deal, and I didn't elaborate. I was about 5 minutes from Indiana. 5 minutes into Indiana, I noticed emergency flashers on the side of the road up ahead. It was the Impala that had passed me hours ago. A guy was standing with his thumb out just ahead of his car, illuminated by the headlights. It was maybe 18 degrees, and he was just wearing a hoodie. He looked cold. I almost stopped, but as I slowed, I noticed dark brown stains on his yellow sweatshirt, and his hands were filthy with something dark, maybe grease from trying to fix his car, maybe crap and blood. I sped up, and his thumb turned into the finger, and his other hand joined it, and he screamed at me. His mouth seemed too wide, and his teeth looked too small, and there were too many of them. I downshifted, jumped on the accelerator, and took off. I called 911 again and reported the stranded motorist. I didn't make a big deal about it, just gave the mile marker number. I didn't tell them that he had screamed, "F you, Ohio." I didn't stay on US 30. I took US 69 to the turnpike and only stopped where there were a lot of people. I tried looking for any mention about the vandalism or the stranded motorist, but found nothing. I now rent a car every trip, and I don't use US 30. Tell me that is not the scariest story ever. I hope it didn't scare you too bad. I hope you sleep well tonight, and I'll see you very, very